כאן שידורי ישראל מירושלים ברשת א' וב'. השעה 3:15. דובר צה"ל מוסר כי סמוך לשעה 2 פתחו הכוחות המצריים והסוריים בהתקפה בסיני וברמת הגולן.
אנחנו תקועים כאן.
אין לי קשר עם 25, נראה לי שזה היה כוחותינו שם. האם יש לנו נפגעים שדורשים פינוי? יש נפגעים שכבר דורשים פינוי. כוח שלנו בדרך אליך לחפש אותך. מהר, יורים בנו.
No doubt in my mind as to what we should do. Israel had to be saved.
Operation Nickel Grass.
Prepare for takeoff, please.
When Egypt defeated Israel in 6 hours and fought the United States for 10 days. Egyptian infantry soldiers stood in tight ranks, silent as if speaking through their eyes. The air was charged with a mixture of anticipation and resolve, hearts beating in unison as if chanting, victory or martyrdom. Some clutched their rifles firmly, others touched their helmets or whispered silent prayers. Behind them, an entire nation held its breath. Before them, the waters of the canal, the barrier the enemy thought would remain impassable. At exactly 2 p.m., the ground trembled under their feet with the first salvo of Egyptian artillery. Soon after, the roar of Egyptian aircraft tearing through the Sinai skies announced that the decisive moment had arrived. Inflatable boats surged across the waters as if racing against time. Suddenly, amid the thunder of bombardment, the Egyptian flag rose high above the barrier, fluttering as though breathing freedom anew. In just 6 hours, Egypt had defeated Israel. Across the front, cries of victory echoed, "God is greatest, God is greatest."
إن التاريخ العسكري سوف يتوقف طويلا بالفحص والدرس أمام عملية يوم 6 أكتوبر سنة 73 حين تمكنت القوات المسلحة المصرية من اقتحام مانع قناة السويس الصعب واجتياح خط بارليف المنيع وإقامة رؤوس جسور لها على الضفة الشرقية من القناة بعد أن أفقدت العدو توازنه كما قلت في 6 ساعات.
No one had imagined that war would break out. No one had expected the Egyptian soldier to cross the canal, defying all obstacles with a spirit that knew no impossibility. Not even the most optimistic had dared to dream that the myth of the invincible army could be shattered in just 6 hours. But as the saying goes, victory does not come easily, but when it does, it shakes the ground beneath those who thought it impossible. Thus, the Egyptians stunned the world, and in Washington, the shock was beyond what words could conceal.
I must say, going back over the conversations that the Secretary has had here in New York with foreign ministers in the last several days, we never had any indication from any of the ministers that there was a military action intended by any of the governments. Indeed, the entire emphasis, as I'm sure those of you who have covered our activities here, the entire emphasis in the area of the Middle East was one of peaceful intention, one that emphasized the desire, certainly shared by us, that we hope peaceful settlements might be undertaken.
Israel was teetering very close to the edge of catastrophe for a while.
Which was a surprise again.
Total surprise. So, of course, to them too. Above all.
On October the 6th, we learned that the Syrians and the Egyptians had launched a surprise attack on Israel. I say surprise. It was no surprise to me that our intelligence didn't discover it, because they're really not that good. But I was very surprised that the Israelis didn't, because they have the best intelligence in the world, and they were totally surprised.
In Israel, panic gripped everyone as Egypt's victories piled up on the front. Bewildered Israeli soldiers abandoned their positions, tanks burned under the Sinai sky, and sirens blared non-stop. It was a nightmare Israelis had never imagined.
מסמכים חדשים ממלחמת יום הכיפורים שנחשפו היום על ידי ארכיון המדינה מאפשרים הצצה נדירה לדרך קבלת ההחלטות של ממשלת גולדה.
סמוך לתעלת סואץ וכן ברמת הגולן רוכזו כוחות צבאיים גדולים במערך של מתקפה.
המסמכים שנחשפו היום בעצם מאפשרים לנו בפעם הראשונה לראות איך תפקדו מקבלי ההחלטות.
האווירה שעולה מהדיונים היא אווירה של קבוצת אנשים שטחית, בלתי מעמיקה.
אחד הדיונים המרתקים מתקיים כשנה לפני פרוץ המלחמה, כאשר הצמרת הביטחונית התכנסה לדון בסיכויים לפתיחת מערכה מול מצרים. ראש אמ"ן אלי זעירה אמר, הסיכוי שמצרים תפתח במלחמה אינו גדול. תמיד ישנה אפשרות שמישהו יעשה שם איזה שיגעון, אבל הערכה הלוגית היא שהסיכוי אינו גדול.
From the first moment, the United States closely monitored the raging war, observing in disbelief the mounting Israeli losses. Hours after the crossing, a phone call took place between Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and White House Chief of Staff Alexander Haig.
I wanted to bring you up to date on where we stand and to tell you my strategy. You may have to calm some people down.
Good. I am sitting with the president.
The Egyptians have crossed the canal at 5 places, and the Syrians have penetrated in 2 places into the Golan Heights. This we get from the UN observers. Our assessment here is read the facts. It is inconceivable that the Israelis' attack would turn in 2 hours and have the Egyptians cross the canal.
No question about that.
Inconceivable. We have to assume an Arab attack.
I think the president feels that way. The president is seriously considering going back to Washington.
I think that's a grave mistake. There is nothing we can do right now. You should wait to see how it develops. Wait until at least this afternoon. So far, not even a Security Council meeting has been called.
He agrees with that. His problem is, if it is an all-out war for him, to be sitting down here in this climate would be very, very bad.
A full-scale war had erupted, not just a battle, but an earthquake that redrew the maps of power. Within days, Israel's military confidence evaporated, replaced by bitter astonishment. Its losses exceeded all expectations, and its once endless arsenal began to dwindle. The scene was clear. The false Israeli myth was crumbling, and history was being rewritten by Egyptian hands that knew no retreat.
באתי לאולפן לומר כמה דברים על המערכה, הקרבות שמתנהלים מיד הצהריים, 1:50 היום, כאשר הסורים והמצרים פתחו בו בזמן בהתקפה בשתי החזיתות ברמת הגולן ובסיני. להעריך באופן כללי לומר כמה דברים כלליים על המערכה הזאת. ובכן, מתנהלים עכשיו קרבות קשים בשתי החזיתות האלו, כאשר מולנו גם מבחינה מספרית וגם מבחינת סוג הנשק צבא גדול וחזק. אינני יודע כמה השתתפו בפועל בחזיתות האלו, אבל המצרים מעבר לתעלה יש כ250,000 חיילים.
אני רוצה להסביר בקצרה את המצב כפי שאני רואה אותו. אני רוצה להדגיש שצריך לראות את המלחמה שבה אנחנו נמצאים מאז שבת בצהריים בשעה 2 ועד היום כמלחמה שונה מהמלחמות שידענו לאחרונה, כולל מלחמת ששת הימים. מדינת ישראל וצבא הגנה לישראל נכנסו למלחמה הזאת כשהיוזמה בידי האויב. בארסנל מן המודרניים ביותר בעולם בא לידי ביטוי במצרים. הוא בא לידי ביטוי בחיל אוויר של מאות ומאות של מטוסים. הוא בא לידי ביטוי בחיל שריון מעל 2,000 טנקים. הוא בא לידי ביטוי במערך הגנה של טילי קרקע אוויר, מטוסים, מק"מים, נ"מ, אחד מן המפותחים ביותר בעולם.
At that point, Israeli leaders turned westward, toward the great power they always relied on for salvation, the United States. On October 9th, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir sent a desperate plea to the U.S. President Richard Nixon: save Israel from the abyss.
We got word that the Egyptians and the Syrians were having great success on the battlefield, and that it was going to be necessary, at least it was requested by Golda Meir, that we resupply the Israelis for the tank losses and others that they had and airplane losses.
Golda Meir wanted to come over to plead her case. I said under no circumstances could Golda come over, because I thought that this would be a sign of such absolute panic that if the Prime Minister of Israel leaves Israel in the middle of a battle.
In the hidden corridors of politics, revelations only uncovered years later showed what was happening behind closed doors. On the morning of October 9th, 1973, tension gripped Washington. Israeli Ambassador Simcha Denitz rushed anxiously to a secret meeting with Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. In the same room sat Israeli military attaché General Mordecai Gur, U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor General Brent Scowcroft, and Peter W. Rodman from the National Security Council. The faces were grim, conversations tense, and the messages arriving from the battlefield brought only surprises that neither Israel nor Washington were prepared for. A U.S. State Department document dated October 9th revealed the details of this secret meeting.
I need an accurate count of what the military situation is.
I brought the general to do that. Let me say something, and then we can have a few words alone.
All right.
We got a message which sums up our losses until 9 a.m. Israeli time. In planes, 14 Phantoms, 28 Skyhawks, 3 Mirages, 4 Super Misters, a total of 49 planes. Tanks, we lost something like 500 tanks. Some were lost on the way.
500 tanks. How many do you have? We should get Haig here. Well, we can give him the figures.
This includes those that were put out of commission for a week or more.
How many do you have?
We lost 100 in the north and 400 in the south.
How did it happen?
It will become clear from the military situation.
So that's why the Egyptians are so cocky. Can I use these figures?
With the president.
Anyone else?
They were given to me for you.
Amid a charged atmosphere, Kissinger hurried to President Nixon carrying Israel's plea for help, fully aware of the grave situation. He went straight to him and briefed him on the unfolding crisis. After hours of urgent discussions and swift maneuvers, Kissinger met again with the Israeli ambassador and conveyed Nixon's decision. The United States will supply Israel with all its military needs.
On your special request, the President has approved the entire list of consumables. That is, ordnance, electronic equipment, everything on the list except laser bombs. The President has agreed, and let me repeat this formally, that all your aircraft and tank losses will be replaced. Of the tanks you will be getting, a substantial number will be M60s, our newest. As for the planes, for immediate delivery, you will be getting 5 F-4s, 2 plus 3. For the rest, you will work out a schedule.
It's a question of days, Dr. Kissinger.
It will be a matter of days. On the anti-tank ammunition and anti-tank weapons, Schlesinger is all set. You know whom to get in touch with at Defense. If there is any trouble, contact Scowcroft. This is everything else on the list, except the laser bombs and aircraft on tanks. You will have to work out a schedule. At the end of the week, we can see what is urgent.
We will take it all by plane.
That's agreed. But you have to pay El Al out. This is for maximum security.
The response, however, was not immediate. The U.S. initially hoped Israel could defend itself without direct intervention. Nixon knew that immediate American involvement would be an admission that Egypt had dealt Israel a crushing defeat. At first, Washington sought a ceasefire declaration, but victorious Egypt insisted on continuing the fight.
And the question came up of, should we immediately respond with an airlift of our own to Israel? And Kissinger's initial instinct was not if we can get a ceasefire first. We've already told the Israelis we will compensate them for all the losses that they've taken, but if we can end this without directly intervening, it would be better.
It was a very tortured time. The Israelis were at the brink. I mean, they were in very deep trouble. And they needed supplies, and they were bleeding badly. And there was a state of schizophrenia or worse within the American security establishment. They had to give Israel something, but they couldn't give Israel too much.
As American aid lagged, Israel's losses on the battlefield mounted, and Egypt's determination to press on grew even stronger, pushing Tel Aviv's leaders to search for any lifeline, even hinting at the nuclear option.
ובפגישה היה גולדה, יגאל, דדו, משה דיין וגליל. ואז הוא אומר לי, משה דיין מגיע לדלת, ומחזיק את היד כבר על הבריח להוריד, הוא אומר, כן, עיקר שכחתי, חשבתי שמכיוון שהמצב, אנחנו שמענו עכשיו חצי שעה את דדו, מצב הוא רע מאוד, שכדאי, היות ולא יהיה לנו הרבה זמן והרבה אפשרויות, שכדאי יהיה שנכין להפגנה, גם להפגנה, גם אופציה גרעינית.
This nuclear hint reflected the sheer desperation overwhelming the Israeli leadership at that critical moment. Israel propagated these rumors in an attempt to pressure the United States into expediting its rescue operation. As Israel's situation deteriorated further, the United States realized the grave danger, and even President Nixon had to admit that Israel was on the brink of total defeat, unable to hold out without external intervention.
There was no doubt in my mind as to what we should do. Israel had to be saved.
ב-12 באוקטובר, היום השביעי לקרבות, המציאות מעמידה את הנהגת ישראל מול מלחמה קשה משצפו. אויב עקשני מזה שידעו ב-67 בלי אור בקצה המערכה. מאזן הדמים של קרבות הבלימה כבד.
The U.S. moved swiftly to rescue its ally through Operation Nickel Grass. An airlift that poured tens of thousands of tons of weapons, ammunition, and equipment into Tel Aviv. On October 14, 1973, Washington officially launched the rescue operation. It was a desperate attempt to save Israel, which had already been defeated, amid Egypt's firm refusal to accept a ceasefire.
And Egypt didn't. Egypt turned it down, and that was what triggered our decision to go with the full-scale airlift, which President Nixon said, if we're going to do it, let's do it all the way. Make it as big as you can, because we'll get as much blame for doing a little one as we will for a big one.
Within days, the Israeli army found itself in retreat, losing a third of its equipment and outnumbered by the enemy 3-1.
As he could not believe, he said, we cannot stop them.
Recognizing their very existence was at stake, President Nixon moved quickly to resupply our ally Israel and their besieged army. With an around-the-clock airlift of U.S. military support.
You've got to understand the United States supported Israel with an airlift at a time that Israel was about ready to be overrun by the Egyptians and the Syrians.
For a full month, American C-141 and C-5 planes flew non-stop from U.S. bases, bypassing Arab embargoes and European objections to rearm Israel.
קורונט איסט הוא שמו של מבצע האספקה האמריקאי הראשון. פנטומים וסקאיוקים נאספים בבסיסים אמריקאיים, ממריאים לישראל, מחליפים סימני זיהוי ויוצאים בשדה הקרב. אך כדי לייצר הישג צבאי, ישראל זקוקה להרבה יותר. שר ההגנה האמריקאי, ג'יימס שלזינג'ר, מתנגד. הוא מזהיר מפני אמברגו של יצרניות הנפט. ב-13 באוקטובר מתחיל מבצע ניקלגראס, הרכבת האווירית האמריקאית לישראל. כשהמחסנים מתמלאים מחדש, הפיקוד העליון מחפש את המהלכים הצבאיים שיביאו להפסקת האש המיוחלת.
It had been a fundamental principle of American foreign policy, heretofore pursued by every president, that the survival of Israel and the maintenance of its capacity to build a future is one of those principles that we will pursue, even if we have to do so alone.
These supplies were more than just military shipments. They were a thunderous political statement. The United States stood firmly and unreservedly behind Israel. Over 22,000 tons of weapons and equipment poured into Israel.
I had to bring the Defense Department in line and have them go forward on a massive airlift to Israel, which was the biggest airlift, incidentally, since the Berlin airlift, and turned out to be much bigger in terms of tonnage that was delivered.
The Israelis, they were in desperate shape. It came to Nixon's attention, and he, who himself was undergoing the torture of Watergate, took matters into his own hands and said, I'm sick of hearing about a little of this and a little of that, and too much will produce this result. Give them whatever they need. Send off every C-5A that will fly with all of the equipment that you can put in those planes, and get that to Israel right away. No point just in losing the war while scrimping over how much to supply the Israelis.
American planes completed nearly 570 airlifts carrying massive shipments, while U.S. aircraft carriers lined up offshore, ready to provide additional support if needed. Amid this critical situation in Israel, Israel's El Al Airlines intensified its own operations, transporting around 5,500 tons of military supplies, via 170 flights. The airlift continued until November 14, 1973, nearly 20 days after the ceasefire was declared. Although the exact cost of the operation was kept secret, reports suggested U.S. military aid increased by 800%, with a staggering $2.2 billion emergency package injected to revive Israel's army after its crushing blows from Egyptian forces.
And in October 1973, amid the Fourth Arab-Israeli War, U.S. Congress approved a $2.2 billion aid package for Israel, boosting its military assistance to Tel Aviv by a staggering 800%. It was during that war that President Nixon famously ordered his national security advisor to send Israel everything that can fly, initiating a massive airlift operation codenamed Operation Nickel Grass. This large-scale air bridge delivered vital military supplies to Israel, including nearly 33,000 tons of equipment.
And then all that, and then we had an M60 tank and the rest of it, tons of 105 millimeter ammunition, which Israel was so short on 105, they were running out of it, and they were short on tanks. Operation Nickel Grass.
إن الولايات المتحدة تقيم جسرا بحريا وجويا تتدفق منه على إسرائيل. دبابات جديدة وطائرات جديدة ومدافع جديدة وصواريخ جديدة وإلكترونات جديدة. ونحن نقول لهم إن هذا لن يخيفنا، ولكن عليكم وعلينا قبل أن تصل الأمور إلى نقطة لا عودة أن نسأل إلى أين وإلى متى؟ إلى أين ونحن خريطة الشرق الأوسط وليست إسرائيل؟ إلى أين ومصالحكم كلها عندنا وليست في إسرائيل؟
Yet despite the transatlantic arms bridges and the urgent American intervention, the undeniable truth remained. Egypt had won. The victory was not merely in crossing the canal or destroying the Bar-Lev line, or in the steadfastness of the Third Army, but in changing the balance of power in the Middle East forever. Egypt forced a new reality. Israel, for the first time, realized its military superiority was not absolute, and that Arab blood could shatter the myth of the invincible army.
بعد ما رفضت وقف إطلاق النار 5 مرات، 3 مرات من الاتحاد السوفيتي، مرة للسفير البريطاني لما صحاني في الفجر يوم 13، ال5 لما جاء رئيس وزراء الاتحاد السوفيتي كسيجن إلى مصر وقعد 4 أيام عشان يقنعني بوقف إطلاق النار. كل هذا رفضته.
The United States, meanwhile, found itself facing a new dilemma. Its unconditional support for Israel triggered a fierce Arab response, an oil embargo that crippled Western economies and forced Washington to reconsider its strategies in the Middle East.
Second, there was a failure to foresee and to understand the oil embargo and its implications and how that would play out. And I want to say just a word about that because it actually is part of the 1973 war that most affected ordinary Americans. People woke up and thought, my gosh, a crisis in the Middle East affects my daily life. Few of you are old enough to remember what it was like to be in the gas lines in those days, and people didn't like it.
Was before the war, the Saudis did not, as Bill indicated, view oil as a weapon, as a political weapon, but in fact, they reached that decision right during the war, especially after the airlift to Israel, and they began to use oil as a political weapon. And again, that was, we thought that was unlikely because of their position on Islam and against Arab nationalism. The last point I want to make was that the 73 war really sowed the seeds for fundamental changes that rocked the region for the end, not only through the end of the decade, but through the end of that last century.
While American planes were unloading supplies in Israeli airports, the world witnessed Egypt's rise as an unbreakable force. And within Washington's secret meetings, U.S. officials quietly acknowledged Israel's defeat. On October 23, 1973, at exactly 4:35 p.m., Secretary of State Henry Kissinger held a meeting with State Department staff where he confirmed, despite the massive U.S. military support, their ally had suffered an unforgettable defeat.
The Israelis have learned that their original idea that they could use the stockpiled equipment that they had from us to score a big victory over the Arabs if we pressed them too hard is no longer possible. If they get into another war, they must do it with our enthusiastic backing or they are lost. And therefore the Israelis, after they recover from the enormous shock of the tremendous casualties they have suffered, their total casualties are around 6,000, with about 2,000 dead, which if you adjust it to the American scale, is something like 600,000 casualties in 2 weeks. That is World War I type casualties. So it will take them a couple or 3 weeks to absorb the impact of what has happened to them. As far as Israel is concerned, we have to be taken even more seriously than we have been in the past. And our insistence on a more politically oriented policy cannot go unheeded.
By October 25th, the war ended with a ceasefire, and Egypt had triumphed, reclaiming its land after 10 days of facing down an endless flow of American weapons into Israeli hands, while Israel struggled under the weight of its military collapse.
1973, מלחמת יום הכיפורים גובה מחיר דמים כבד, כ-2,700 הרוגים.
זהו כדבר המשורר כופר חיינו.
המלחמה מובילה למשבר אמון כלפי ההנהגה, ומחאה חסרת תקדים פורצת בציבור ובכנסת.
כאם ל3 בנים ש2 מהם משרתים בצבא. אינני מאמינה לכם.
הממשלה הזו היא בלתי נסבלת בעיניי.
הלחץ הכבד שובר את גולדה מאיר, ומעל בימת הכנסת היא מודיעה.
הגשתי היום לנשיא המדינה כתב ההתפטרות בתפקידי כראש הממשלה.
מלחמת יום הכיפורים הפכה לתמרור אזהרה מפני שאננות בהנהגה.
لا تتصوروا مبلغ السعادة وأنا أتفقد مركز الرئاسة الإسرائيلي المواجه للسويس وبجانبه المدافع التي اعتدت على السويس وخربت الزيتية وخربت السويس. أتاهم أبنائي من الجيش الثالث وتركوا مركز القيادة كما هو بالكامل، فروا بملابسهم فقط.
The war was not merely about reclaiming territory. It was a gateway to reclaiming dignity and a timeless lesson in how military resilience could translate into sweeping political gains. It wasn't just a clash of armies. It was proof that determination and careful planning could tip the scales, even against the world's strongest powers. American intervention could only delay a historic inevitability. Israel was defeated, and Egypt, through the blood of its soldiers, had etched an unforgettable military and political victory. In 6 hours, Egypt crushed Israel. In 10 days, it stood firm against American weaponry. And in the end, Egypt emerged victorious. The land remained Egyptian, the will remained Egyptian, and the victory remained Egyptian, despite Operation Nickel Grass.